Stuck in?
Yes. Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Cool.
Cool. So let's start then. This is the third episode, right? And thank you very much, James, for coming. And of course, like Mark being here with us in this third masterclass. We have planned at least like 5 still to run. We have 1 more to go still this year, sorry. And this is about how startups benefit from advisory boards. So Luis, over to you so you can tell us a little bit more.
No, it has been absolutely fantastic. I don't know, I see familiar faces in the previous 2 episodes. First one, the first steps into the boardroom with Mark himself. Second one, how to build a high-performing board with Mark and Rafael. I'm gonna ask Natalie to kindly put the recordings in the chat. If anybody wants the recording, we can send to everybody. Amazing sessions, over 400 different people in both. So main takeaways, I don't know, Mark, if you wanna quickly.
Yeah, look, and I know, no, look, absolutely. And look, for everybody, it's great. Look, I see Tony there as well. Tony, we're going to have to get your input on the call today. You got some super experience in this piece. So, look, I think for everybody, look, the highlights from the 2 previous calls, there is this tool that we send out, your board readiness quotient and your board build plan, just 2 very simple, intuitive documents that'll just help you figure out, look, what is unique about my experiences and what kind of boards do I want to build in terms of what should my portfolio look like, you know, from now over the next 3 years. So kind of leaning into it is not an overnight process, but how you can lean in and help structure what your board portfolio should look like. Always remember point number 3, 80% likelihood it'll come through your network or network's network. That's what we're here for, to be that network. Some idea, never assume people know you're looking. I have so many calls with people every day on, look, how do I get it out there? Look, you got to talk to people. You got to let people know you're open for board opportunities, what's unique about your experiences and what kind of roles you would like. So never assume, get out there and join a few platforms. There's some interesting ones out there. We have a list of stuff that we recommend. So there's no one place that will be, you know, the single source of truth. There'll be multiple ones which will give different things depending on your level of experience and the type of boards you're looking to step into. Okay, what's next, Louise? We've got well, there's an amazing session with Belen. James joined our last session with Rafael and kind of teed this one up beautifully. Belen with Aguilar, they are the #1 partner with NASDAQ for board appointments, very US focused, but real best-in-class program. VAB has a strategic partnership with Aguilar. Belen's going to come on and talk to everybody how to build your board bio and some tips and tricks on winning your next role. So kind of US standard, best practice on board bio building and, you know, winning your next role, and a little bit on how to use the Aguilar system. I think we have onboardings with Aguilar. Is it 2 a month or 1 a month, Louise, for our members? So
once a month. Last one was
once a month.
Yesterday, and next one is in December.
Okay, fantastic. What's next then? David, over to you, David. Or Louise,
yeah,
go ahead, Louise, sorry.
David.
No, it's gonna be with me, yeah. Very pleased to see you all. I think that I can see a lot of faces that are like VAB members, but many great friends of VAB or potential people analyzing if you want to become part of our ecosystem. Also, welcome to our partners. I can see you there, Delphine from Board All, and I think that we have some other partners there. I'm very happy just like to announce like after 3 weeks, I'm finally back home in Brazil. So Mark, finally, I will be much more connected online here. Coming back from this amazing trip during 3 weeks to Dubai, Singapore, and India. It was amazing to be with all of our members, and this is part of the community. Right now we have, for those of you that don't know us, a global community of global directors with more than 450 members, approximately more than 55 countries. And we have like the majority of them are CEOs, entrepreneurs, angel investors, or experts for over 100 different industries. More than 26% are women. We catalogize and we separate on board ready, board learners, all with amazing profiles. Approximately 37% are part of YPO as well. And the reason of why we are here, if we go to the next slide, is really to facilitate the way for all of you to get either into your first board position or the next board position. And how do we do it? Is via the connecting, the learning, and the networking. And really, this is to build a global ecosystem that is in the next slide. As you can see, we want to become the first platform that can really put in one-stop place all the expertise related to the boardroom, right? So it doesn't matter if you are in Canada, you are planning to move to Africa, or you're planning to go to Asia, just contact us because this is the plan. We want to match and build stories together of like-minded people like all of you. So thank you very much for all of our partners. Right now we have 20 partners across the globe, and we're very happy to continue growing the local board ecosystem. Also very happy, Mark, to announce here some of the successful cases. And many people were saying, like, okay, it's great to see the engagement of the community, but what about the success stories? So right now we're going to start in our newsletters for our members and also in our monthly calls to share stories of successful cases. As you know, we have placed more than 12 members in the HAE Entrepreneur Accelerator program, so they became mentors. Also, congratulations to John Rose, who got with our partners from Board All advisory board position as well. We also have another client that is called Machac. It's a big chain of burgers in Spain that they just made an offer. We cannot announce at the moment, but made an offer for 4 of our members as well. This is great. Congratulations also to Stefan Carlin, that together with Jesper got into a board position at Sky Puzzler, and this is in the aviation space. And also very happy to see our partners from COX growing and expanding in Europe. So right now we have Rene, who is a VAB member, partnering together with Luan Abrams. And in the next slide, also some couple of nice faces to see. Congratulations to David Huguet and to Tony, who got a really nice position in a sound entertainment company in Germany. Congratulations to the two of them. Also great to see the relation between Herv, that is a VAB speaker, YPO resource, together with the president of Chanel, that is part of our members, with Olivier. And he ran recently an event about Web 3.0 in the UK at the Chanel company. Also, I was recently chatting with Carmen in Singapore, and she mentioned to me that she's making advisory work together with Weku, and this is in the HR area. And of course, we wanted just to mention 3 other ones that we have, that is John McEntee, Francesco, and sorry, I just love here. And Elizabeth, sorry, it's like too many faces, too many great stories. So I think that this is it from my side, and really thank you, congratulations, and let's continue building nice stories. And in case that you want either to raise your visibility, to become part of a really unique international community of talented people, please reach out to us, or either if you're an entrepreneur and you are trying to set up your board, we are here to support any of you. Thank you, and I think that now it's over to you guys back and to James, that is the main guest today.
Fabulous. Thanks, David. Look, huge welcome to James. James has an incredible profile, incredible experience, out of Harvard, entrepreneur, successful exit, been in the startup environment. James is kind of post-acquisition at the moment, and James was delighted to come on board today and share his experience on how startups can benefit from advisory boards. So James is going to talk for a little bit. The chat's open. This should be as interactive as possible, so please get stuck in. The team will be manning the chats. We'll go to live questions as they come in. James, a huge VAB welcome, and thanks for the time today.
Thank you. It's nice to be sharing time with the group. Looks like a great group out there interested in this topic, and looking forward to this.
Fabulous.
Yeah, one thing I'll probably start off with is why we end up choosing this topic. Back in September, VAB ran a gathering in New York City, and during the dinner, as well as the pre-meeting set up by John Stammel and Kathleen Phillips, there were probably about 6 discussions with people who were interested in joining startup advisory boards, or were currently serving as advisors with startups, or are trying to figure out how to optimize it for their own organizations. And we thought if there were that many repeat conversations, maybe there were others across the organizations. So I guess that's what led the conversation and pulling this together. I'll probably add a couple things just to start. In terms of primary audiences, I see a couple. One is for VAB members who are running ventures who are trying to figure out how to optimize sort of an advisory board, not a governance board of directors, but an advisory board. And then also for VAB members who are interested in engaging with startups as advisors. Now, those were what I see as the primary audiences. I also know there are people on this call with much, much deeper experience in this space. And I encourage you to jump in with your comments or flag your hand for the moderators to pull you to add color and further perspective on this conversation as well, too. But we're looking forward to good dialogue. We're looking forward to good dialogue today.
Fabulous. James, I mean, maybe just to kick it off, maybe a little bit on your experience with your startup. Took us through a little bit how you found value and you found kind of benefit in getting some advisors together to help you on your personal voyage.
Yeah, okay. So I basically, my history is for the past 20 years, I've been running a strategy, research, and predictive analytics firm, basically a data-driven strategy firm. And we never thought that our jobs would ever be automated. And then it was about 5 years ago, we recognized that the things that made the work difficult to automate were exactly the kind of stuff that machine learning would be able to do. And we recognized that ultimately machines would be able to crush what we did as human analysts. And we decided instead of being crushed by machines, let's see if we can build that machine. So we spun out a data science venture, a machine learning venture out of that firm. We purposefully, we knew on one hand, it wasn't going to be a unicorn. It was a very niche business. And therefore, we were going after building this sort of logically, sustainably, and looking for ways to advance in the marketplace without burning through a ton of cash. And we recognize that one of the ways to do that, or here's one way to put it, is I have this definition of entrepreneurship, which is what I describe as entrepreneurship is amassing resources when you have no resources to amass. And that's part of why we pulled in advisors. What we were looking for were extremely hard and difficult skill sets to bring on to an emerging enterprise, but we could bring on as advisors. And there were a couple of areas that we had targeted on that. One was in terms of market, to be able to demonstrate that there were people in the market who saw where the future was going over the next couple of years. We ended up bringing on the retired CEO of the largest trade organization in the space. And so in part, initially we thought the value of him was credibility, but what we found was the real value that he was delivering was basically introducing us to potential partners and potential funders. And
that's
so
impressive. That's incredible.
Yeah, that was really nice. And then we had another advisor because basically what we were doing is we were generating hyper-localized economic and demographic forecasting and analytics and feeding off the federal statistical system, but running it through a machine learning system to basically nowcast it, forecast it, and get it more granular. But no one could believe we could do it because the gold standard was the stuff out of the federal statistical system. No one understood the problem or saw what machine learning could do, or very few people did. And part of how we got through that was we brought on one of the former heads of one of the federal statistical agencies as an advisor. You know, administrations changed. She no longer had her position. Perfect fit in that case. So that was a good situation. Once again, we brought her on initially as a tiny startup. It was basically 2 founders and 2 employees. Brought her on as credibility that she knew the issues that could be tackled. And what she ended up, the value added she ended up bringing to the table was, number one, she understood what was going to have change in the federal statistical system, which gave us advanced insight into how we build a system to take advantage of those changes. And then also she provided introductions to other former heads of federal statistical agencies to get inside what was happening there. And then when some acquirers were thinking about acquiring us to be able to build an international system, put us in touch with international federal statistical agency heads to understand how we could, I don't want to say exploit in a bad way, but how we could leverage what they have done to bring it with higher value with machine learning. So that was a really great experience because we could not have hired that talent within the organization. But it was a great way to get in the game and get ahead of the game.
I was going to say, James, there are 2 phenomenal examples. And like you said, from super early stage, and we're going to go into some slides later on with the nitty gritty on compensation, on payouts. And look, the nuts and bolts of how you make it happen. Maybe give a few more examples on other ways that advisors help create value for early stage ventures.
Okay, a couple ways in terms of what advisors can do. Here's how I sort of break it up. Advisors are able to bring value in bridging the gap on upcoming and current and upcoming make or break areas. So in other words, as a startup, you don't have the full set of resources to be able to fully address the make or break areas, but advisors can help bridge that gap. They're not there full time with you, but they're there to provide advice to the CEO at the time, or the executive team at the time they need to be planning for what's ahead, to be able to see around the corner, to understand what could go wrong when these kinds of high value resources are difficult to secure. So there are three make or break areas that I see as really critical where advisors can step in. One is bridging make or break subject matter gaps. So in other words, if you've got a venture and you're trying to build this machine to go attack this big problem, but you don't have the full stack team yet, which you won't as a startup, and most likely, it helps bridge the gap on specific areas of subject matter that you have to conquer, that you've come up the scale and fast. So that's one area where advisors can really help startups. A second area is accelerating access to make or break audiences. In other words, you bring on advisors with deep networks in the areas that you have to penetrate. And it doesn't mean that they will do that automatically, because they have reputations they need to protect. They can't put you in front of audiences when you're going to embarrass them. But in working with them, as they build confidence in you, it's more likely they start to say, so for example, like that one, both advisors, the first things they did was not start introducing us to contacts. They needed to know that we weren't going to embarrass them. They needed to know that we burnished their reputation by them bringing in something cutting edge. But once they got that comfort level, they were wonderful at providing access to networks that otherwise would have been closed. There's a third area where advisors can really help startups, is helping the CEO anticipate and confront make or break events ahead. In other words, number one, they've seen the problems and the opportunities that are going to be encountered. And number two, an advisor, the CEO and founder can build comfort and trust and confidence in, so they can hear the things that, so an advisor who will be able to share the things that you really don't want to hear as a founder, but you really need to know. And that's sort of another really good role for an advisor for a startup.
Yeah. James, I was going to ask, what was your inspiration? I mean, to go out and get these like advisors. Had you seen it before in practice, or how did you approach it? I mean, did you just say, hey, God, look, I've heard about you. You're like the most credible person in the space. How did it happen? And that feeling of that reach out from your side, I mean, someone's got to make the first step and make the first call. So I'm just curious how you found it.
Well, the impetus for bringing on advisors is a couple things. One is I've sat as advisors for ventures before, so I've seen it in some ways that have been productive, and I've also seen bad situations that I would not want to do again. I know it's not required or mandated, so a lot of ventures don't do it, but because we made the decision to grow a sustainable business, to be able to grow a business that was not hugely capital consumptive, where we couldn't just drop cash on expensive professional advisors everywhere. We recognized that building a board of advisors, or surrounding ourselves with some advisors, was a really good way to be able to advance us in a way that we could afford and can get us ahead of everything else. So we made that commitment to it, and we just started having conversations with people in the industry. So in other words, we didn't call people up and say, hey, do you want to be an advisor? We were saying, hey, because of your role, I've noticed you because of your role, and I've been very interested in your thinking on X. We're this venture. Here's the problem we're trying to tackle. Any chance you might have 30 minutes that you can spare to chat about it? So in other words, the ask initially was not, will you be an advisor? Because I wanted to see, can I click with them, and can they get sort of mentally engaged and interested in this? Exactly. Fabulous. So that was part of it. Now, there's another thing I found about that process. What really helped were people who recently retired from key roles that were important to us. because they were in a position where they just came off, one just walked out of her job or had to depart her job because the administration changed, and so all the federal agency heads turned. Another had recently departed the CEO role at the largest trade association. So these are people who are used to going like full blast trying to figure out things, what's around the corner, and all of a sudden did not have those responsibilities. So I think that's part of why they were willing to say, hey, this could be a really interesting way to stay engaged and to see what's around the corner.
I'm recently retired, James, as well. So look, if you need me at any stage, just call. But I was going to ask, it leans into the question on what the benefit for them. I mean, it's intellectually stimulating. It's, if the chemistry is there, helping out, and maybe talk through a little bit what's in it for the advisor. And before we go into the comp equity stuff.
Yeah. So there are a handful of areas where I see reasons that make sense to engage an advisor. One is if basically for a lot of, for people who've either done it before or out of big companies haven't been engaged with the ventures, there's a lot of, in the right ventures, there's a lot of energy and joy. Sometimes it's not always pretty, but it's a different environment that for me, I love the startup and building environment. Or for some of my friends at very large companies who haven't done that, it's a chance for them to see that, to figure out like, will they ever want to jump at some point, or how can they capture and bottle some of that to bring into their large mega organizations where they're a senior manager? So that's one. And two, aligned with that is sort of professional exposure. It's to be able to see things. So for example, like for those two advisors we brought on, it was exposure to, hey, machine learning and data science is a topic that's going to impact their fields, and there's a chance to get close and see what's happening there. So various types of professional exposure. And then another reason it might be interesting to get involved is you love this stuff, but you don't have time. You don't want to do like, two boards that can consume 100 or 200 or hours a year. You don't want that kind of time, but you want to be engaged in advising CEOs. Another one is you might want to be testing the waters for a board of directors role, because with startup ventures, if they head down the venture capital path and raise external funding, when they get to a Series A round,
you're going to need it.
They're going to be required to bring in at least one outside director. Series B, probably another one. So it's a chance to figure out, are you someone who can gel with the CEO that they trust? Because usually it's the venture investor who's going to force that outside director. But as a founder, you probably want an outside director that you can have a working relationship with. And then it's also a chance to be able to demonstrate value. So a venture investor on the other side can say, hey, this person seems to make sense. They already know the business. They're already adding value. They'd be a credible external director. So that's another reason. Another reason to do this is there is the potential for a payout without big time commitment, as we had mentioned earlier. And we can talk more about specifics of some of that. But when I say potential though, because startups are risky. Most don't make it, but the advantage is of the ones that pay out, it usually more than makes up for the ones that didn't make it. Yeah.
All right. Before we go to a couple of slides, James, just going to bring in Barnaby. Barnaby, you want to come in live and ask your question?
Well, thanks, Mark. Well, I'm interested in some of the nitty gritty of it. So how often, how big would an advisory board typically be? How often do they meet? What would they expect remuneration wise?
You've gone in with a hard one, Barnaby. All right.
Are these people, no doubt there are some people on the call who are on advisory boards. Are they looking to be part of something that's exciting and do it for free? Or
well, we got the comp bit is coming up.
Okay, we'll get on with it, Mark. Come on, you've never been one for faffing around. Get on with it.
All right. Well, then Barnaby, we will get on with it. So good questions. Okay. First off, in terms of the composition or the structure of the board of advisors, bear in mind that it's not a governance body that doesn't have any specific requirements. You can make it whatever you want to make it. So for example, there may be boards of advisors that physically meet. And that may be one of the big appeals to someone joining a board of advisors is physical interaction and networking. Or it might basically be a collection of people who are essentially advisors to the CEO and founder, who might never meet because their disciplines are so different, or in the age of COVID, as when we were operating. So they might not, there's no meeting requirement. It depends on what you're trying to get done with it. In our case, they didn't meet because their disciplines were so different, their issues were so different, and they were never in the same place at the same conferences. Because usually, if they're in the same category, it's easy and cheap to set up a meeting at an industry conference, and you don't have. But in our case, we had 2 advisors because we identified we had 2 fundamental holes that we had to fill, and that we had to bridge somehow. So we had 2. Others might have 4 or 6 or something like that. So it's whatever your need is. And I would just go at it as a startup or as an early stage venture. It's figuring out what are those make or break, what are the handful of make or break things that where you have to find a way to amass resources to bridge the gap. But you don't want it to go beyond that for a couple of reasons. Because number one, you have limited bandwidth. As the CEO of a venture or a founder of a venture, you don't want too many people that you have to manage in this process. You want the right number of people for the issues where you need that right external help. And then, maybe part of the reason you don't want to make it too big is maybe this is a transition into compensation. Okay, so
beautiful segue, James. Beautiful segue.
Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up. I'm going to actually pull up slides on compensation because we have some that's a little bit more specific on this in case relevant. Okay. And
then we'll keep going after the slides. We'll keep going. We've got a rack of questions kind of lining up, James. So after the slides, we'll go back into the Q&A, yeah? Okay. All right. So from a company perspective, basically, you should probably assume that you're setting aside about 1 to 2% before major funding rounds. Once major funding rounds come in, that gets diluted out pretty fast. I would advise do not exceed 2%. And the reason why is because you will probably only have about 15% to set aside for options or a stock structure. And you still need to have, senior managers you bring in and employees. And so therefore, that puts a little bit of a cap on how many people that you want to bring in, because now let's break it down to sort of the individual perspective. At an individual level, here's what we're seeing out there. Basically, the range we've seen is anywhere between 0.1% to 2% for advisors. Once again, with that 2% cap, I would only consider going 2% if it's one person who's going to help you get through the make or break thing and they're critical and you want to make sure they. But other than that, if you want multiple members, you're not going close to 2%. The more typical range is about 0.25 to 1%. Now it could drop to 0.1, for example, if it is well on its way and has more funding and stuff, but I'll show some examples of what determines the range. The range, one is stage. Is it just a concept? Founders with an idea who aren't full-time yet. That's going to be a higher range to pull them in. Or is it pre-revenue, or are they in market discovery, or are they scaling? If it's scaling and funded, it's on the lower end of that range. Another thing that determines where you are, time expectations. So for example, as some of you know, if you're on a public company board of directors, you're doing probably no less than 100 hours a month, probably 250 a year, I meant. 250, I mean, that's significant. It's why you can't do more than like maybe 3 boards of directors. But for ventures, it might, for example, with our venture, we were telling our advisors, we're targeting 10 hours a year for over a 3-year term. And if we have you on heavy lifting on the projects, we will pay you a consulting fee for those projects, but no more, you're not expecting more than 10 hours a year. So that was one factor that, that we had on time expectations. Another thing that helps determine the range is external engagement versus passive engagement. Are these people who are basically available for calls and trade emails? Or these people you have out there in meetings with you or at trade conferences with you, or that you are really selling as part of it and you expect to be part of the back channel reference checking process. Another thing that determines range is this a commodity resource where, hey, you found a good one, but there are lots of people like that? Or is this like the #1 top industry guru known for making and breaking ventures? Also, stock structure. This may go into too much detail and we can talk later, but like,
how much funding have they raised or will raise, how much dilution is likely to set in or has kicked in, what's the strike price, is it in the money or out of the money? Those things also impact as well too. And I probably won't go into too much detail on that piece, but I'm happy to if anyone wants to. But those are the things that set up the compensation structure. And at least with early stage, actually, there was an interesting conversation with Udo Doring of the Advisory Board Center earlier. Basically, what he characterized is these are emerging companies, pre-revenue to $1.5 million in revenue, which are before there's cash compensation. It is the equity. It's not until you get larger when you will find cash comp for these kinds of things.
Fabulous. James, will we go back to Q&A, or do you want to go through another slide, or will we?
Yeah, I could go either way. I mean,
let's get Philippe in. We'll bring Philippe in for a Harvard alumni question, and then we'll go back and we'll pick it up again. Super. Philippe, over to you.
Hi, James. Thanks so much. Great to see another HAE member here, and thanks so much for the presentation. Yeah, I just had a comment in terms of a lot of the startups really want to pull advisors in, and purely on and you just mentioned this a moment ago, on an equity basis. Do you have what are your thoughts there? I mean, you mentioned up to 5 million in revenue. That's the most typical scenario. But I've also heard from other folks with some other discussions we've had at VAB that as a strategy, it's probably better to ask for some sort of cash component in the process. So just wondering kind of a little more color around that issue.
Yes. Okay. So let's take, for example, what Udo Doring had when he was laying out the survey that they had produced for the Advisory Board Center. So just to clarify, he said these emerging companies are what they characterize as pre-revenue to 1.5 million in revenue. After that point, he was saying once you're beyond sort of emerging, they were seeing 40,000 to 70,000 a year. Now, we don't see too many of those in the venture space where they're building boards until after, for example, they have significant funding and they might have a technical advisory board. So, for example, in life sciences, you're more likely to see something like that. Or maybe, for example, if it's super hard tech and you're bringing in like academics, you might see something like that. Now, in the last venture that I had, we did have that clause where it was all equity for their advisory role. But if there were specific consulting, heavy lift consulting projects, we would pay them we had set, I can't remember where it was set at, like 250 an hour or something like that. If there were things that go beyond sort of the advisory things, but we needed them, for example, if we needed them to produce white papers or something like that. We had a cash component if we were going to go head down that path. So in other words, we weren't asking for free work. I mean, the stuff that time we were going to ask of them to access was easy time for them to give. If they had to physically start to block stuff out of their schedule, we had a pre-arrangement that they would be paid for that.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Lovely. And by the way, thank you, Philippe, for such a great introduction. That's why James is in the community via you. We're partners from Harvard Alumni Entrepreneurs Association. So thank you very much. Tony Lewis, are you there? Are you online? I think that if you can share with us a little bit your perspective in your investor journey, your lab business, and if you want to share a little bit of your insights as well, would be great.
Yeah, happy to. It was interesting to hear all the different perspectives coming across in that presentation. So our story really was when we went through our Series A, we added to the board. So we went to it was a 3-person board with 2 board observers. We actually had a project to build a proper advisory board separately, which we ended up essentially pausing in a formal sense, but instead building sort of an ad hoc community that we could use as our sort of advisory reference points. So there's sort of 3 areas we needed to cover to different degrees. So one was credibility. Second one was network, and then the third one was expertise. And in the end, what we ended up really focusing on was expertise. It was very much a sort of an area of who do we know who had sort of been there and done that. So it was other entrepreneurs who had scale. Particularly what we were focused on at the time was sort of data-driven, marketplace style sort of areas. So actually one of our investors had been early stage at Upwork, and he had sort of helped that business grow really successfully. He in particular has actually been a growth hacker. And then we had a second investor who was Brazilian, who'd I think at that point already sold his food delivery business. So we never actually formed it as a board, largely because there was no real need to pull everyone together at the same time. But what we did do is have them essentially on call. So, and we would probably take, I don't know, maybe an hour a month or so, conversations, questions as they came up. The thing is, we were very lucky because they were investors and because both of them actually had a decent amount of money, neither wanted any cash. But we would happily have paid them for their time if they'd asked for the money, but they never did. So because of that, we're able to get the sort of expertise for free. We did actually ultimately add another advisor who we did pay though. And I think we were paying him a rate of something like $250 an hour. He was actually a former Twitter guy. And what he sort of brought to the table was a really strong idea of architecture for sort of growth data pipelines and things like that. And he helped us a huge amount because what we essentially had done was we'd hired an internal marketing team who were very sort of, young and scrappy and up and comers and that kind of stuff, but had never really sort of fully, shipped and delivered on those sort of models. So he became sort of a constant sort of point of reference, and we essentially could almost sort of give to the marketing teams like, hey, look, when you hit a blocker, this is someone that you can call. So it became very much expertise focused, and it was very much a sort of an ad hoc someone we could lean on. The big difference, of course, between the sort of formal board versus this sort of advisory kind of panel ultimately was the formal board. Really, their role is to sort of just say no, right? To say like, this is a direction you shouldn't be going down. There's some issue with it, or we had to sort of report to them formally about the things that happened, like when we got into lawsuits and stuff like that, which unfortunately happened a couple of times. Fortunately, it wasn't too bad at the end. Whereas the advisory group was very much more sort of, let's get that expertise when we need it. Very credible people, very interesting, had sort of been there and done it before. So that really helped, and we were very lucky to have it. But as I say, we never formed it as a board. Really, it was just like these are the guys and girls we can call them when we need them.
Thanks for sharing, Tony. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. You're no legal troubles, but you're no longer allowed back in the US. But we just don't talk about that.
Hey, James, we have one more question, and I'm going to invite Janie. Janie, do you mind to come and ask your question, please?
Yes, I will. Now, I was just listening to you, James, and kind of thinking about all the experiences that you outlined to us. And I was thinking, I have two questions actually. So my first question to you is, so which background would you say is the most sought after for advisory boards or regular boards? Thinking that a particular person like me coming from HR, that's my first question.
Okay, so a couple things on that one. Number one is I go back to that earlier slide about what's make or break for the specific venture. So it's not any specific category. It's not like you're trying to find like fill 8 slots or something like that. I would worry if I were an investor if the team had so many bridges that they had to gap, or gaps that they had to bridge. So for example, one example came up in the last comment about like high-level architecture. I see that that's an area where I see a lot of companies trying to find advisors because that's hard to get. You don't need a high-level architect in a lot of cases early on, but you need someone who can help you build that scalable system of where you're heading. So for a tech venture, that might be one, but then also basically thinking about this in terms of breaking it down into the functional characteristics of what might be make or break. So for example, like, HR, for example, might be valuable for a venture that is going to have to undergo significant scaling. So in other words, if they have to be prepared to scale fast, that might be an example of where a venture that might end up where an HR advisor might be make or break in that scenario. For others, it might be sales, it might be marketing in terms of just the functional disciplines. But once again, there's not like any one that is the one functional area that's the must-have. It depends on what is make or break for that specific entity.
Okay, thank you. That really makes a lot of sense. And while I was kind of thinking through this question, I do actually work in a in a scale-up company where I'm at the CHRO, and I've been a part of mergers and acquisitions and preparing the company for an upcoming IPO that unfortunately was withdrawn in the last minute. But I was heavily involved in the business, not just doing HR, but simply being a part as the rest of the top team to actually manage the whole business, and involved in finance, supply chain, building up the organization and making sure that it's that we don't have too many of each, but really are very lean and slim for this upcoming IPO. So I would say that I also have an MBA, if I didn't say that. So, but how do I display that? If I really want to make myself somebody that people would reach out to, how do I make sure that that comes forward? Because that's also a lot of experience, right?
Huge experience, Jenny.
Yeah. And you touched on something. It might not be direct for your situation because I don't know the details, but for example, one of the most valuable roles an advisor can play, on that last point I had about something who can help the founder, anticipate and confront the make or break decisions ahead. Someone who knows how to help them navigate to the exit is hugely valuable. So in other words, someone where the founder and advisor can see eye to eye and say, hey, this is a company that if it goes well, it is on path for an exit through, like, how do you prepare it to make it the most attractive acquisition possible? So that's a kind of example where someone with a specific functional discipline, and this is, for example, HR becomes a huge component of that thing. That's an example where a specific that kind of exposure and experience in a specific functional discipline could be very important if that's sort of the make or break endpoint that founder is trying to navigate towards.
Fabulous. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Weil, are you able to come in? Weil is kind of living some of this at the moment. Weil, do you want to come in and ask your question directly to James?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for the invitation first to the call. James, I just would like to ask you a couple of questions. One is on your perspective in terms of putting an advisory board together, and how this relates to the strategy of the platform that we're trying to put in place. And so if I describe that, I would say, would an advisory board have the mandate or the approach of let's say making what we're doing good be better, so getting better at what we're doing, or would get a mandate of taking us to the next level? So that's my first question. My second question would be, how do you manage the thin line between the advisory board, keeping the advisory board excited, yet it's still advisory, right? So, they might give you 5 or 10 pieces of advice, you would take 1 or 2, and then obviously, you enter into all sorts of complexities between people bit by bit, incrementally starting to feel that the platform is moving in a different way than what they would think would be the most optimum way.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks,
For
Weil.
question number 1, go ahead. Were you about to say something?
No. I was just saying thanks for the question, Weil. It's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, James.
For question number 1, about is the mandate like basically protecting the existing status of the platform or thinking what's around the future? It could be either, because once again, you get to set what you want your advisory board objective to be. Now, stepping back, if I were the investor, I would be a little bit concerned if it's sort of the advisory board that's responsible for protecting the existing status of the platform. I would expect that's what the team does, the internal team does. That's not something I would want to have have one step removed through an advisory board. Advisory boards, I think, are helpful in sort of bridging that gap between what you can accomplish right now and what you're going to have to accomplish. But you can't bring that skill set or that set of expertise in full-time onto the team yet. So that's sort of just a personal preference of where I think advisory boards can be most valuable. But once again, it depends on what is that specific need for the company. In terms of that thin line between running, the advisory versus execution, for example, with the advisory board that I had last set up, I had made it very clear, the advisory role was probably we're aiming for 1 call a month, knowing it wasn't going to be every month, or a sit down whenever we were at the same conferences together, just to share updates and get their advice. What we found was it was more that there were specific questions we had and we reached out for their advice, or they had specific things they wanted to put in front of us, contacts or things around the corner. But it's why we did separate. If we ever did go into an execution mode, that is covered under the advisory contract, but it wasn't part of the advisor thing. It was there would be a project if we ever went down there. But to separate, we weren't expecting someone to come in as a consultant or we wanted them as an advisor. And then if there was a side project, there would be a separate situation for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Val. That's a great question. Thanks, James. James, do you want it? I was good, David. Just before we're going to go a little bit over time. So if anybody can stay, we'll stick around. We've got a couple more questions to get through. James, going to say, do you want to show the slide you have on the contract piece, just to give a little bit more after? I think that'll just help frame it a little bit for some of the members on the call. And then we'll go back to David and the questions.
Legal structure, here's where we get into a lot more nitty gritty here. So let's jump into this. And for legal structure, there are probably about half a dozen things that are really critical to have on this. Number one is, what is the role? Defining it generally, knowing it'll probably shift a little bit as you get into this. Two is, what's the compensation? What is the amount of compensation? What is the term of that? We had 3 years because what is the vesting schedule on that? Because there are reasons you want to be able to basically, for one of our advisors, if she were named to be head of another federal agency, she would have had to drop. We had to be able to accommodate that, or if we wanted to remove someone, that they would have, some stock. Is there acceleration? So for example, single trigger acceleration. If you're acquired, they get the cash. There were also issues such as, basically what's the expiration date of the stock options, although we had a shadow equity plan, which was much more favorable for them. Termination, what if they don't work out? What if they don't add value? How do you do it so you can say, if they do nothing before the first cliff, you can say, hey, it doesn't really seem to be working out, but why don't we just part ways and we'll give you the first chunk on the first cliff. And it's a very clean and easy and friendly way to terminate someone off there if they're not doing anything for you. Conflicts of interest, make sure that they're not bringing conflicts of interest in, because that could tie you up during due diligence on an acquisition. Independent contractor status versus employee status, although if you're in California, you would probably need have that reviewed because of Assembly Bill 5. Limitations, basically, for our advisors, we said we're not putting any limitations on their work as long as it's not adverse to the interests of the ventures. Non-disclosure agreement, obviously, you have to do that to be able to protect trade secrets, and especially if you're going to end up going down the patenting route. Also, work product ownership, assignment, and licenses. Assuming you want to be acquired, you have to wrap this up as tightly as possible. For some advisors, there may be some challenges, especially the closer they are to your area. You may have to find ways to assign and license, or find feedback clauses, which lawyers can help you with. But if they're not directly in your industry, it's probably a pretty clean thing. But all these things you have to have, because if you don't have these, if you're going to go through an acquisition of any significance, these things are going to be scrutinized super heavily for all your advisors, consultants, employees. So, and by the way, I've got a lot more detail on that if anyone wants to ping me later about any of these things or specifics on any of these points, but I at least want to go through a high level at this point on the call.
James, that's super insightful, super insightful. David, you want to go back into the Q&A?
Yeah, and also to mention that we're going to share for the members also the contact with James if you want us to build the bridge, not a problem. I think that you covered already the questions on the skills part, but I wanted to ask to Oliver Kunz, still any questions regarding the competences in the finance, legal, HR aspect that you mentioned in the chat?
Yeah, I think Jenny kind of asks something like the same question, because it was related to what type of competencies are looked for to start in that area, and Jenny was focused mainly on HR, but I was just asking roughly what are the key skills that are expected in a stage of startups.
Lovely. Lovely. So we move then, like Jürgen made a comment here. I don't know if Jürgen, do you want to complement something or you're okay? What about like your new role advising CEOs? Like, is there like anything that you want to share with us on your insights?
Our understanding of coaching is a fair bit different. So it is coaching the CEO and the whole business, but exits and things of that nature is probably the target of 80% of our clients.
Perfect. Thank you. Also, Ken Tyler, you were having like also some comments.
Actually, they were covered fairly nicely. It was the key thing was that I took away which is what I wanted to make a point of too, is it's not that easy for people first time through ensuring that they get the right conditions inside the contract. Firstly and foremostly, what's the actual role that they're playing? A differentiation between advising, consulting, mentoring. In other words, how much are you expected to use your nose versus your fingers, and then how you get compensated if that indeed comes up. That's a lot of detail that sort of gets ignored. One thing that wasn't talked about is for advisory boards, any questions with respect to insurance that you might be able to cover, which you would have for board of advisors, right? When they have fiduciary responsibility.
Except as a board of advisors, they do not have fiduciary responsibility, unlike a board of directors.
Yep.
And so there's typically not coverage. You can probably pay your insurance company to add board of advisors in for an extra cost, but that's typically not required. However, as someone coming in, probably what I would say is that as an advisor, if I am sort of a passive advisor and not marketed out there publicly, I am probably fine with the advisor relationship as is. I'm not expecting D&O coverage because I have no financial fiduciary obligation. I probably would as an advisor though, if they use me publicly, especially in the fundraising process, or basically if they use me publicly raising money among angels, I would probably ask the company to indemnify me because I don't want to be pitched as someone putting a seal of approval and then there being some investor lawsuit later when I'm probably a deeper pocket than the venture itself. And so that's probably a personal level of protection I'll put in. But if I'm not being publicly pitched as part of it or involved in the financial chain, I'm not going to worry about it too much because I suspect there's some remote chance, but I've never heard of a normal advisor relationship ending up in any kind of litigation issue.
And are you putting that in? And are you putting that in the contract or recommending it get put in the contract?
I would recommend it as an advisor, if I smell at all that there is potential for this to be used to sell and bring investors in, because a lot of these companies aren't going to return to the investors. That's when I, as an advisor, would ask them to add an indemnification clause into the advisor contract.
Yep. There's some nice resources being shared in the chat from Linda, from Lynn, from John Barker. Thanks for sharing those, guys. That's
and Oksana.
We'll try to. Hey, Oksana, we'll capture those in the chat and send that. Luis, if you can keep tabs on the subscriptions or the resources that guys have mentioned on the chat, we'll try to capture that in the follow-up bit.
Go
ahead, James. Yeah,
a couple of law firms have also published sort of their standard template contracts too. Like a couple of the big ones like Cooley, Godward, Wilson Sonsini have published their advisory board templates as well too.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, I think that we have time still, like 2 more questions. I think that we can go with Garrett, and Garrett, you are asking there for EdTech space sales business contacts, so the VAB team can help you to reach to some of key people. Definitely. And do you mind like to come in and just make your question, Garrett, as well? And then we can go with you, Philip Guarino, the differences between regions.
Hi everyone. So by way of background, I'm an M&A guy, finance guy, Irish by origin like Mark, and I have lived in Prague for a long time. Mark, we have a lot of commonality, Mark.
I'll see you next week, Garrett. I'll see you next week.
Yeah. Well, maybe even tomorrow if possible.
I fly in on Monday.
I'm currently involved with an EdTech business who follow a software as a service model, but it's very, very early stage, and targeting the sort of university research space. And I was just looking for sort of specific advice, around really very, smaller companies with owner managed, because a lot of what James, everything you've said is all perfect, all makes a lot of sense, from my experience with private equity and venture capital. But just in the smaller world of smaller businesses, is there any sort of specific advice you can give?
So when you're saying smaller businesses, so you're talking about more like basically instead of sort of ventures, more just like smaller operating companies, family-owned companies. Is that what you're referring to?
Owner-operated, led by owners, but with the potential to scale up and to bring in venture maybe at a later stage.
Okay, so I would probably characterize a lot of those in some of the same buckets. Basically option to scale up and raise out external capital. I actually sort of like those situations because, and this is one of the things where an advisor can really help the founders is everyone assumes that, raising venture capital is good. Raising venture capital often puts the potential payout at a more precarious situation than before. It's rocket fuel that can get it to a higher outcome, but it also creates significantly greater risk for the common shareholders. And so I like the ones that have optionality, that can build their business off of customer revenues and have the option to put it on a scale to bring in external capital if it's sort of a just add water and grow situation. So I like those circumstances. I think many of these things that we had discussed would probably fit within those circumstances. But sort of digressing a little bit, do bear in mind that it becomes a completely different ballgame once you bring in venture capital in terms of what it does, the risk profile, what it does to the common shareholders or those who hold the derivatives or equivalents of common shares, and payouts. So a little bit aside, but hopefully that's part of the value some advisors that an advisor can bring, or that a certain type of advisor can bring for a certain type of advisory situation. But I would not shy away from those that aren't necessarily on the supercharged venture track and have the option more like you're talking about, owner operated, making it off of existing customer, basically growing the old fashioned way through customer revenue. And advisors can help them figure out how to scale that faster and better with the possibility or option of going for external capital to do that. I think those are great situations. It doesn't have to be the unicorn that ends up actually, and I don't know if we'll have time on this call because it's noon already Eastern time, but I've got some examples of when I can do this with others individually, actual payouts of what's happened in those different kinds of scenarios for advisors and stuff like that. That's an example of the kind of thing that we can cover.
That'd be fantastic. That'd be a fantastic topic, James. That'd be fantastic.
Hey, Mark, I will need to leave. I have a hard stop, but I will leave it with you, the last question. And thank you very much, James. Thank you all, and good to see you all. Thank you very much.
Look, I think it was just Philippe's question on regional variance. Philippe, it's pretty much across Europe, across Asia, like pretty similar setup, pretty similar structure in the startup space. We see differences on scale up and paid for board. I mean, more with cash comp on the paid for board. US still leading a little bit and then slightly staggered down, but pretty much everything aligned with what James said on the comp piece. We'll definitely do another session on the payout. I think that'll be super interesting, James. James, maybe just I had a kind of a final thought or final question. Just when you go back to your, when you were setting up the business and putting that advisory board together, like very often we see when we're talking to entrepreneurs is they think it's just this big, scary, complicated thing about putting an advisory board together. And we spend our time kind of saying, it's not, like you can make it super easy. Yeah. Maybe just talk through that conversation again, because I think that's the message we try to get out. Hooking up with an advisor can make, like you said, it can be game changing in terms of the difference for your business because of the credibility, the contacts, the insight, the shared experience, them sharing where it didn't work out, preventing you from making the same mistake, all those things we speak about. But maybe just go back into that early mindset on, you thinking, oh my God, this is going to be hard, it's going to be easy. And clearly the impact was phenomenal.
Okay. Number one, I had to keep it simple for a couple reasons. Number one, we did not raise external capital other than a small angel round. So I did not have lots of dollars to drop on this. Number two, the other reason I had to keep it simple is I was not full-time with the company. I was not the CEO. I was more of an executive chairman. And so there were a limited number of hours I had for this company that were constraining what I could do. So I had to choose the activities that could get the highest value out of the hours that I had in, which is why we went through the process of what were the gaps what are the make or break gaps that we had to fill? And there were 2 of them, and we only went with 2 advisors. So I didn't have to manage a bunch of others. So that was part of the process. It was pretty simple. We kept it simple by design. In terms of game-changing, outcomes, I don't think there was any question about it for one of them. For example, the former Industry Trade Association CEO, his ability to introduce us to venture capital firms at the same time that we were entering acquisition discussions helped our situation. We were a tiny company, but we had options. It's because he was able to open up some options that we could keep credible threat to the other side to go down to different paths. That was quite helpful. In another situation, the game-changing thing when it came to the acquisition is that for the former head of the federal agency, what that really helped us do was sort of a similar thing. We were a tiny business, but we started getting nibbles from companies about acquiring us, but there were a couple that had very different paths and plans for how they want to optimize value from an acquisition. And what she was able to do was give us credibility. One of them wanted us to basically build out our system internationally. And she was able to put us in touch with international federal statistical agency heads. So we could very credibly say, we have contacts that you don't to scale this internationally. So even though you're one of the biggest giant data firms in the world, we can get it done way faster than you can. And that advisor gave us that credibility where we didn't like their offer for the company, but their offer made it easier for us to get a better offer from a different company. So simple advisors, but in the end, once again, tiny venture. It was 2 founders, 3 employees. Those 2 advisors were critical in positioning us to get a strategic premium over a standard multiple of revenue.
That's incredible. James, so insightful, so kind. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really enjoyed it. And Louise, you got to nail James for the exit bit. So get him locked into the calendar. Don't give him a choice. And we'll look forward to that one. But James, thanks again. So cool. Really enjoyed it.
Sounds good. This was fun. The only closing comments I'll have to your point, Mark, is these things can be simple. We were a tiny company. This was very simple. It delivered. The advisors delivered. And then second off, if you are thinking about joining an advisory board, it can be a tremendous accelerator in terms of developing skill base and we can share later examples of payouts. Sometimes they can be pretty sweet for, we'll put it this way. Our advisors, because the acceleration clause, they spent less than 10 hours as advisors to the company before, one of them was able to extend what she was able to do to buy a house in an overheated market in Seattle because she had more cash to play with. And so it can be small amounts of time that in the right circumstances can pay out. And so things like what payouts look like or what I look for when I'm considering ventures to advise it, happy to go into any of those discussions with anyone.
Amazing. James, thanks so much. Thanks everybody. Ken, it's a clean one. I just put it on. I don't know.
Not making a comment. We got to close.
All right, guys, have a great rest of the week. So great to see you.